Ben and Kate, Marlene's biological children, sat beside Trina, their father's second wife. They looked past their own mother, siding with the woman who replaced her. Across the table, Marlene slid the original documents forward, untouched since 2005. "I raised them, he left me. But the account?" she said. "He never changed it." The mediator's voice cracked. "Primary beneficiary, Marlene Langston." And just like that, the ex-wife no one mourned became the only one who inherited. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." The wind shifted as the final prayer ended, stirring the black fabric of Marlene's coat. She stood 3 paces back from the casket, hands folded, spine straight, not out of pride, but precision. Across the fresh plot, Trina Langston dabbed delicately at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Her nails were coral pink, polished, and perfect. On either side of her stood Ben and Kate, Marlene's children by blood, Walter's by shared history. And there they were, holding Trina like she'd raised them. Ben leaned in, whispered something. Trina nodded, wiped another phantom tear. Kate's voice wasn't hushed. "She's all we need now." Marlene heard it, every syllable. Her lips didn't move. Not then. Not even when the pastor turned to her with a gentle nod, hoping for some word, some grief-tinged gratitude. "Thank you for your words, Reverend," she said. Crisp, polite, final. And with that, she stepped back from the family who no longer seemed to know her name. No one walked her to the car. No one asked if she was staying for the reception Trina planned at the golf course Walter never even liked. She sat behind the wheel of her modest Lexus, same one Walter once teased her about for being boring but dependable, and waited until her fingers stopped trembling. Not from sorrow, from clarity. That evening she poured tea, Earl Grey, with 1 sugar cube and a splash of almond milk, and carried the porcelain cup into her study. The briefcase was on the top shelf of her armoire. She hadn't opened it in over a year, hadn't needed to, but she had known this moment would come. Walter was always careless with details, sloppy with updates. He could draft speeches and forget passwords. She placed the briefcase on her desk and spun the dials, 6-2-1. It clicked open. Inside, a single folder, red leather, labeled in her own handwriting, "Langston account. Primary beneficiary, M. Langston." She smiled, not wide, not cruel, just enough to honor the silence she'd swallowed at that graveside. 12 years ago, when Walter set up the investment account, they were still married. He'd insisted on naming her the primary, "just until I figure out the rest." He never did. Even after Trina, even after the divorce. He had changed wives, homes, golf memberships, but not the beneficiary designation. She unfolded the documents. There it was, his unmistakable signature, 2005, unaltered, untouched. The desktop monitor glowed to life. She logged into the investment portal, still registered in both their names, though dormant for years. Her fingers didn't hover. They typed with the steadiness of someone who'd been called outdated more than once, but never incorrect. The screen loaded. Account balance, $1,081,233.41. The numbers stared back at her like absolution. There had been no mention of her in the eulogy. Not a single acknowledgement of the woman who raised 2 children, managed Walter's first campaign, nursed his mother through hospice, and swallowed the humiliation of watching him remarry someone younger than both their kids. But numbers didn't forget. Paperwork didn't play favorites. She took a sip of tea. It was just the right temperature now. Then she opened her planner, turned to the next day. In careful script she wrote, "Carmen, Estate Council, 11 a.m., and below that, pull updated copies, begin transition, no anger, no vengeance, just paperwork, clean, binding, and already too late for anyone to argue." Marlene sat at the window the next morning, watching a crow hop along the frost-lined fence. She held her tea with both hands, the porcelain warm against her knuckles. On her lap sat the folder. Same one Walter used to call Our Future, Now, she simply called it what it was: leverage. The morning light hit the red leather just right. No phrase, no loose threads. Just like her, intact, underestimated. Flashback, 10 years earlier. Walter had insisted on the account. Diversification, he called it, spinning jargon like he'd invented wealth management. You should be the primary, he said, sliding the pen across the granite counter. It's safer that way. You're the practical one. And she was. Always had been. While he dreamed big, she balanced books, kept the lights on, and filed their taxes with post-its and precision. In 2005, the account was opened. Primary beneficiary, Marlene Langston. Not even her divorce in 2011 changed it, because Walter, distracted, overconfident, never changed it. Now Trina likely believed it was hers. The newer wife. The grieving widow who wore Walter's ring and his last name in fresh ink. And Ben and Kate? They'd spoken at the funeral like executives delivering a transition memo, not a word about the childhood Marlene raised them through. Only praise for Trina's poise during loss. They weren't mourning Walter, they were eyeing the vault. But Marlene had the key. And more importantly, she had the lock. She pulled the signed documents from the folder again. Ink, dark, notarized, dated in Walter's best penmanship, back when his signature still curled like a bow, untouched since the final update, before Trina, before the split. That afternoon, she drove to a modest office on the 4th floor of a converted bank. Carmen Bell, her estate attorney of 15 years, greeted her with soft eyes and a sharper mind. Carmen didn't need to be reminded. She'd helped Walter draft the account's initial paperwork. She scanned the folder briefly, nodding. Still valid, she said, tapping the corner. No subsequent amendments, no override. It's yours, Marlene. You don't owe them a cent. Marlene exhaled through her nose, a sound closer to relief than triumph. I want to make that known, she said, but not loudly, elegantly. Carmen smiled. You always did believe in formal announcements. That night, back in her study, Marlene opened her laptop. She stared at the blinking cursor of a new message. The contact list for the Langston family chat had once included her, not anymore. She'd been quietly removed sometime last year, after Walter's second hospital stay, she suspected. But email still worked, and so did dignity. She began to type. Walter and I built many things together. Some visible, some less so. I trust that what was left behind will be handled with care and honesty in the spirit with which it was created. She paused, considered softening it. No edits, no apologies for the paper trail. Across the room, the folder sat quietly beside a fresh vase of tulips, and beneath it, one sealed envelope remained untouched. Inside, the exact balance, a certified statement, and Carmen's formal summary of legal ownership. She sat there for an hour and finally decided of sending it. The cursor blinked like a pulse. Marlene read the message again before hitting send, once silently, once aloud. No edits, no smiley face, just clear, intentional syntax. Walter and I built many things together. I trust what he left behind will be honored with care. She didn't expect warmth in return. She expected silence. And silence arrived right on schedule. Nothing. For 23 minutes. Then, finally, a single reaction appeared beneath the message, a clapping hands emoji. From Kate. Not a reply, not a thank you. Not even a got it. Just a digital pat on the head. Sarcastic, lazy, dismissive. Marlene closed her laptop. Later that evening, while refilling her tea, a notification lit her phone. Instagram. She didn't follow Kate or Ben anymore, but her friend Elaine occasionally sent screenshots of things you ought to know. The photo was filtered in warm beige, Trina in a tasteful black sheath dress, eyes cast downward, Ben and Kate flanking her beneath an oak tree, all arms linked. The caption read, Still a unit. Family first. Langston's forever. Marlene let the screen dim on its own, then walked over to the small metal drawer she kept beneath her bookshelf, opened the fireproof lockbox, and slipped the clapping emoji and the photo into a manila folder. She printed the screenshot. Wrote across the top in blue ink, Emotional severance confirmed, May 5th. and filed it next to the certified beneficiary statement. Carmen called the next morning. "They'll reach out soon," she said calmly. "Let them talk first. You owe them nothing until they figure out they have no leverage." Marlene nodded, her eyes fixed on a hummingbird outside the kitchen window. It darted toward the azaleas, hovered, then zipped away without touching a petal. "I'm not waiting for them to bloom," Marlene said. "I'm tending my own roots." Carmen exhaled, a soft breath of approval. "Then we stay the course." That afternoon, Marlene drove an hour north to the Red Brick Public Library in Walter's hometown of Arleston, a place no one from the New Langston Circle had bothered to visit in decades. She walked past the community board, past the wooden sculpture of a boy reading under a tree, and into the main office. "I'd like to make a contribution," she told the branch director. The check was written for $25,000. When asked how she'd like it listed, she wrote on the donor line in crisp cursive, "Langston Legacy, managed by M. Langston." No first names, no shared ownership, just the truth. She was still a Langston, by strength, not by sentiment. Back home, the light had shifted. Early evening now. The house smelled like lavender from the laundry room and rosemary from the back garden. She settled into her study and opened her estate log on her computer. Under Ben and Kate's names, she created a new column, "Observe Only." No privileges, no access, no questions answered, just witnesses to what they chose to forfeit. At 7:43 p.m., her inbox pinged. The subject line read, "Quick question, accounts?" From Kate Langston. "Hi Marlene, hope you're doing okay. Just wondering, do you happen to know who's handling the financial accounts from Dad's estate? Trina's not sure which advisor he worked with before everything. We're just trying to get things squared away. Let me know. Thanks." Kate. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of their last interaction, just a sudden, belated interest in logistics. Marlene stared at the email, then highlighted the text, copied it, opened her estate log again and pasted it beneath Kate's name. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote, "They erased me. But absence clarifies. Now they reach not for me, but for what they think I held." She closed the journal, made herself a fresh cup of Earl Grey, and waited. Not for reconciliation, but for the sound of footsteps, soft, entitled, and late, knocking on a door that was no longer unlocked. The email came at 8:06 a.m., subject line, "Beneficiary confirmation, Langston account." Carmen had forwarded it from Walter's financial advisor with one line of commentary. They walked in like heirs, walked out empty-handed. Marlene's coffee hadn't even cooled yet. She read the message twice, then tucked her glasses on top of her head. Ben and Kate had gone to Walter's advisor the previous afternoon, accompanied by Trina. Marlene hadn't needed to be there. She'd already done the work 15 years ago, ink, signature, notary, filed. Walter had simply never undone it. Primary beneficiary, M. Langston, account locked, funds pending release to named party only. They had nothing. She clicked on her phone, no messages from Ben, none from Kate, but Trina's name appeared mid-morning. The caller ID blinked once, twice, then again. Marlene picked up on the fourth ring. "Hi, Marlene," Trina began, voice gentle but tentative. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I think there might be a little confusion about one of Walter's accounts." Marlene stood at her window, watching her hydrangeas bob in the breeze. "No confusion," she replied. "Just paperwork." There was a silence on the other end. Trina cleared her throat. "The financial advisor said it was yours?" "It is," Marlene confirmed. "Okay," Trina said softly. "I just didn't realize nothing had changed." "I guess none of us did." "I suppose you assumed," Marlene replied. "But assumptions don't hold up in probate court." Another pause. Then Trina asked, "Would you mind sending over whatever you have? For the record?" Marlene opened her secure folder as they spoke. She pulled up the PDF titled Langston Account Beneficiary 2005 and tapped Share. The signature was clean. Walter's writing, still strong. The notary seal crisp in the corner. "I'll send it now," she said. "You'll see everything's in order." "Thank you," Trina said quietly. I appreciate the clarity. Marlene said nothing more. They ended the call. 15 minutes later, her inbox pinged. From Trina Langston. Subject, clarity. Wow, classy. Marlene replied with one sentence. Not a performance, a paper trail. That evening, Carmen called just after dinner. They're rattled, she said. Their lawyer reached out for mediation. Marlene paused, fork suspended over her plate. Trina? No, Carmen said. Ben and Kate. They want to meet formally, challenge the release of funds. Marlene let the fork rest back down. The salmon had gone cold. They're claiming intent? She asked. Likely, Carmen said. But it doesn't matter. Walter's intent lives in the documents. And those haven't changed since 2005. Marlene stood slowly, walked toward the bookshelf where the Langston folder now sat between two leather-bound journals. She ran a finger down the spine. They thought it would just fall into their laps, she said. They thought wrong, Carmen replied. Want to proceed with mediation? Marlene nodded to herself, then replied aloud. Yes, she said, but I want to choose the room, the table, and the tone. The light outside dimmed as the sun slipped behind the trees. Marlene stood still for a long moment, eyes on the folder. The silence didn't sting anymore. It sharpened her. The next day, they all went to the mediator office. The air inside the mediator's office felt climate-controlled and chemically polite, like every argument had to wear a blazer. Marlene folded her hands in her lap. Her posture was calm, practiced. Across from her, Carmen clicked open the file case with the kind of elegance only law school and patience could teach. Ben and Kate entered first, visibly annoyed by the lack of a court bench to slam their disappointment against. Trina trailed behind them, less smug than before, but still wrapped in silk and soft perfume. She offered a tight nod. Marlene gave none back. The mediator, a man in his 50s with glasses and the demeanor of a drained school principal, introduced himself, then turned the floor over. We're here at the request of the Langston family to discuss claims to a previously undisclosed investment account totaling just over $1 million, he began. This meeting is voluntary. Any agreements reached today can be made binding through counsel. Carmen leaned in, hands folded. We're here to clarify, not to concede, she said. Trina spoke first, voice low but steady. Walter always said he wanted the money to go to Ben and Kate. He may not have updated the paperwork, but that was his verbal intent. Ben chimed in. She was divorced from him. They hadn't been together in 2 decades. It doesn't make sense. Carmen opened the folder. Intent doesn't override legal documentation. Walter opened the account in 2005. The primary beneficiary, from inception to now, has never changed. That beneficiary is Marlene Langston. She slid the signed forms across the table. Clean, notarized, stapled. His signature, his handwriting, 2 witnesses, no amendments, no alternate assignments. The mediator adjusted his glasses, studied the document silently. Kate looked furious. So we get nothing? After all he told us? You get what he left, Marlene said quietly. And what he left, legally, was mine. Ben's voice cracked. You're using Dad's death to get even. Marlene's gaze didn't shift. Number, I'm using what he forgot to change. Trina sat back, saying nothing more. The mediator sighed. I see no grounds for contest, no legal basis to freeze or redirect funds. This is resolved, Ben muttered under his breath. Carmen packed the folder back into her briefcase. As they exited, Kate brushed past Marlene like a stranger in an airport. Trina hesitated, but it was Carmen who broke the silence with a low whisper as they walked out the glass doors. They underestimated your quiet. That evening, Marlene returned home and placed the folder back into its place inside the antique cabinet in her den. It clicked shut with finality. She poured herself a modest glass of sherry and stepped onto her back porch. A cool dusk breeze touched her neck, and she tilted her face toward it. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating, only breath. A black and white photo of her and Walter from the 1980s hung near the bookshelf. She didn't look at it, not tonight. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote in long, measured strokes. It wasn't war. It was record-keeping. The next morning, an envelope appeared on her doorstep, handwritten, No return address, her name on the front in smooth, cursive ink, Marlene. She picked it up carefully. The paper was heavier than standard mail, thicker stock, linen finish. Inside, a single note. The envelope was cream-colored, smooth, and hand-addressed in blue ink. No return address, just a familiar curl in the L of Langston. Marlene recognized Trina's handwriting before she even slid it open. She let it sit beside her teacup for a full 5 minutes. She wasn't in a rush. Truth had a way of steeping like good leaves. Finally, she opened it. Marlene, I wanted to acknowledge that I made assumptions about the account, about the past, and, most unforgivably, about your place at the funeral. I saw your face that day. I saw how they treated you, and I didn't step in. I'm sorry. Trina. It wasn't long. It wasn't overly emotional. It was, strangely, just right. Marlene folded it twice and placed it in her desk drawer beneath a stack of bank records. She wasn't moved to tears or anger, just not untouched. Still, grace didn't equal revision. She opened her laptop and added a clause to her estate plan. Public apology shall not be interpreted as grounds for reinstatement of inheritance or shared assets. Trina could have the last word in ink. Marlene would keep the last word in law. That Thursday, the garden club met at Marianne Fletcher's home. White linen-covered tables dotted the backyard, blooming with peonies and idle gossip. Marlene sipped lemon water under a striped umbrella while avoiding any conversation about Walter. A woman in pearls leaned across the table. You holding up okay? Marlene gave a polite smile. I'm pruning, just not roses. There was a pause, then a knowing nod. The conversation shifted to mulch and slugs. Later that afternoon, back at home, Marlene opened a folder labeled Seed Fund. She had spoken to Carmen about starting something useful, quiet and forward-thinking. Now she began wiring $50,000 into a new trust, Langston Literacy for Women. The mission? Provide financial literacy workshops for young women aging out of foster care or navigating college without family support. It was the kind of thing she wished someone had done for her decades ago, when Walter still controlled every bill. As she clicked Confirm Transfer, a small thrill pulsed in her chest. Not revenge, but repair. The next day, an email popped up from the East Hills Journal. The subject line read, Profile Request, Langston Legacy Initiative. A reporter had seen the Langston Trust's nonprofit registration and wanted to feature it in a column about women-led philanthropy. Marlene didn't reply right away. She read the request again, then once more, slower. This wasn't about Walter. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the redirection of it. That evening, she walked barefoot across her back patio, the air damp with coming rain. She poured a glass of white wine and leaned on the railing, her mind miles away from funeral programs and probate paperwork. Her phone buzzed on the table. She checked the screen. Not a message. A post. Kate. Some people mourn in private. Some weaponize a will. Marlene stared at the glowing words under a filtered photo of the cemetery gates. The comments were sympathetic, vague hearts and sad faces. One reply simply read, So sorry, babe. She didn't screenshot it. She didn't reply. Instead, she tapped her estate planning app and reviewed the contingent clause she'd added just yesterday. There was still room for edits, but nothing urgent. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, a clean headline stamped across the front of the East Hills Journal lifestyle section. Widow-turned-silent strategist, how Marlene Langston rebuilt a legacy from quiet power. The photo accompanying it was understated. Marlene on her garden bench, wearing a navy blouse and pearl studs, a teacup in hand. The caption read, We don't stop loving when we're erased, she says. We just redirect it. Marlene read the headline twice. Not for ego, for accuracy. She scanned the first paragraph. Her years as a music educator, her marriage to Walter, and the founding of the Langston Literacy Trust. The piece made no mention of Trina, Kate, or Ben. No sordid disputes, just the facts, just the direction her grief had taken. She folded the paper in half and placed it beside her toast. Then she opened her inbox. The emails poured in. Subject lines like, Thank you for being visible. Your article made me revise my will. I didn't know we were allowed to do this. Women of every decade, writing from library computers and city condos telling her, "You reminded me I'm not a footnote." One woman, a retired nurse in Arizona, wrote, "My daughter called me obsolete last Thanksgiving. I've been paying her phone bill ever since. You just gave me permission to log out." Marlene sat back and let the weight of it settle. She didn't reply. Not yet. She just read. In the comment section beneath the digital version of the piece, a verified estate attorney from New York had left a single line. "This is how you protect what you built." Marlene copied the comment and pasted it into her estate folder under a tab called Third-Party Validation. That afternoon, a new email slid in. Short subject line, no punctuation. Sam, her grandson. Kate's son. "Grandma, I had no idea about any of it. Can we talk? Sam." She stared at the message for a long while, the cursor blinking below his name like a pulse. Her reply was just 2 lines. "Lunch? Friday. Your pick. Love, M." They met at a cafe across town. Small tables, warm bread, no crowd. Sam hugged her gently, like he wasn't sure if he had the right. She hugged back, without hesitation. He looked older than she remembered. Not in years, but in eyes. The kind of aging disappointment gives you. They ordered coffee, then silence. It was Sam who broke it. "I read everything. I didn't know how far it had all gone." Marlene stirred her drink. "None of it happened overnight." "You don't seem bitter," he said, almost like a question. She smiled faintly. "Bitterness is noisy. This is architecture." He blinked, like that line knocked something loose in his mind. "I'm proud of you," he added. "I hope that's not weird." "It's overdue," she said, "but never unwelcome." He pulled out his phone. "Do you mind if I post this lunch? Just, not about the article. Just us." She nodded. "As long as you don't crop out my good side." They both laughed, something that felt rare, but real. By evening, her garden lights flickered on, casting long shadows over the stone path. She was pruning when she saw the car pull into her driveway. A black SUV, clean, parked at an angle like someone uncertain about staying. The door opened slowly. Trina stepped out. Alone. No makeup, no performance. Just her. Marlene straightened from the rose bushes, brushing soil from her gloves with slow, deliberate motions. "Come for tea," she said finally, not unkindly, "or stay out there and burn. Your call." Trina stepped forward. No stilettos today, just flats, jeans, and a sleeveless blouse that clung to the humid air. She looked smaller. Inside, Marlene led her to the sunroom, quiet, floral, and bright. 2 cups already set from habit, wait, beside the kettle. Trina noticed, said nothing. Marlene poured chamomile and added 1 sugar cube to each, though she didn't ask. "Sit." Trina did. Her fingers curled around the teacup like it was breakable. "I'm not here to argue." "That would be unwise," Marlene said, sipping calmly. "And boring." There was a pause. Outside, wind tapped a branch against the window. "I thought," Trina began, "when I married Walter, that I was marrying into more than just the man. I thought there'd be a future. Stability. Inheritance." Her voice didn't break, but it slowed. "He wasn't a generous man. Not really. But I believed in the idea of him." Marlene folded her hands on the table. "You believed in what you were sold. That's not the same as theft." Trina's eyes lifted. "I didn't know you were still the beneficiary. I swear, I just assumed—" "You weren't the only one," Marlene said, voice even. "But assumptions aren't paperwork." Silence swelled, polite and stinging. "I wasn't good to you," Trina admitted. "I ignored you. At the funeral, I knew. I saw your face. I chose not to speak." Marlene studied her carefully. "That was the moment I knew I'd win." Trina blinked. "I watched my children wrap themselves around you like you'd always been there. As if I was the embarrassing chapter. The prologue no one quotes." Her tone was light, but the blade underneath gleamed. "But I didn't cry. I counted." Trina looked down at her lap. "I'm not trying to take anything now. I'm letting it go. Officially, financially, emotionally." Marlene nodded once. Then you may finish your tea." They sat for another 10 minutes, talking about nothing: weather, local road closures, the best hydrangea soil mix. When Trina stood to leave, Marlene didn't hug her, but she did walk her to the door. As the SUV pulled away, Marlene returned to the kitchen, opened her journal and wrote, "She passed the test they all failed." Underneath it, in smaller cursive, "No performance, just peace." Later that evening, Carmen called. "Ben and Kate," she said, no greeting, "just filed an emergency motion with probate court." Marlene didn't even blink. "What now?" "They're claiming that your disbursement of funds post-Walter's death is premature. They're asking the court to freeze all access until an independent review of spousal intent can be conducted." Marlene laughed softly. "They think freezing my account will thaw my affection?" Carmen sighed. "It won't go far. You're solid legally, but it could delay some of your trust allocations if the court agrees to review." Marlene's fingers tapped the ceramic rim of her teacup. She was no longer angry, just resolved. "Let them try," she said, "but tell me when I can file the response." "You want to handle this one directly?" "No," Marlene replied. "I want you to attach a copy of Walter's original signature page, and under it, add mine, dated this week, for contrast." She hung up the phone, walked upstairs to the guest room she never used, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the Langston account folder again. Everything was still there, neatly labeled, notarized, timed and true. She ran her hand across the top page and whispered, "You never updated a damn thing, Walter." And now, I'm the one making the updates. The folder still sat open on Marlene's desk when Carmen's second call came through, just after sunrise. "The emergency motion was denied," Carmen said briskly, as if she were reciting a grocery list. "Judge reviewed the paperwork, ruled that Walter's documentation stands clean, clear, uncoerced." Marlene exhaled slowly, one hand cupped around her tea, the other hovering over the embossed file. The seal still glinted from last night's lamplight. "They tried to accuse me of manipulating him?" she said at last. Carmen's voice dropped. "They called it financial coercion of an aging spouse. Said he was vulnerable. Implied you orchestrated the beneficiary paperwork as a form of delayed retaliation." Marlene let out a soft, bitter laugh. "They don't realize Walter was more likely to give up a lung than let me suggest anything once the divorce was final. The court noticed that too. Notarizations from 2005, 2010, and again in 2014, all with the same designation: unchanged, untouched." "Unlike them," Marlene murmured. The morning passed in small, mechanical movements. She watered the houseplants, pulled the linen napkins from storage, baked a batch of molasses cookies from the same recipe Walter always hated and the grandkids always loved. By noon, Carmen had sent over a scanned copy of the court's rejection. Marlene printed it, filed it under a new tab. Attempted interference, closed. But the unease remained. Not fear, something colder. Calculation. "They'll make it personal now," Carmen had warned. "That wasn't a play for money. That was ego. Expect retaliation." Marlene stood before her bookshelf, fingertips trailing the spines of biographies and law volumes. Then, without flinching, she pulled a red ether binder from the third shelf and carried it to her desk. She opened to the tab labeled Medical Agents, Ben, Kate, gone. With 2 strokes of a pen, their names were replaced. Medical Power of Attorney, Samuel Langston. Backup Agent, Carmen Doyle, Esquire, no ceremony was needed. She scanned the revised page, uploaded it to her encrypted archive, then emailed a copy to Carmen with the subject line, "Updated, personal scope closed." That afternoon, she called her CPA and authorized a new public allocation from the Langston Trust. A $50,000 grant would be issued to a national scholarship program for first-generation women in law. The announcement would include one line, prominently featured in the press release: "Funded by M. Langston, in memory of the principles her children ignored." She hit send. The notification tone barely faded before her phone lit up again, this time with a text from Carmen. "Check the Tribune." Marlene opened the article on her tablet. Centered in bold font was the headline, Langston estate bypasses children in historic redistribution. Former spouse of the late Walter Langston leverages sole beneficiary status to restructure family trust. Funds now earmarked for public equity programs across 4 states. Beneath it, a photo, one she hadn't posed for, but had been taken anyway, showed her standing in front of the Civic Center, holding a certificate next to a scholarship recipient. The caption read, "She held the signature. Now she holds the power." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. The ache in her joints didn't flare. Not today. Outside, birds chirped over the sound of a delivery truck reversing. The world moved on. So did she. Inside her planner, she wrote in small block letters under that day's date, "They went to war for $1 million. I built a legacy instead." The morning after the press release broke, Marlene woke to 3 voicemails, 7 unread texts, and 2 emails titled "Urgent," all from people who hadn't spoken to her in years. By noon, Walter's cousin Clarissa had posted on Facebook, "Just found out about the Langston Trust drama. Wow." A thread of comments followed, polite in tone, razor-edged in subtext. Some praised Marlene's philanthropic pivot, others offered passive-aggressive laments, sad when families fall apart over money. What no one seemed to acknowledge was the simple truth: the family had fractured long before the money moved. At the market that afternoon, a woman Marlene barely knew from church approached her in the coffee aisle. "Quite the headline," she said with a tight smile. "People are talking." Marlene smiled right back. "Good, they should be." Across town, Ben and Kate weren't smiling. The Tribune's article had gone local viral, landing them in an uncomfortable spotlight they hadn't anticipated. Friends who once nodded along with their entitlement were now asking quiet questions. "Why would your father leave everything to his ex-wife? Why didn't you contest it sooner? Didn't you know?" Even their children were beginning to ask things they didn't have clean answers for. The answer came, unexpectedly, from one of them. Marlene was seated at her usual cafe table by the window, stirring cinnamon into her tea, when Paige entered, hesitant but steady. Kate's daughter looked thinner than Marlene remembered, her backpack slung low, eyes cautious. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes," Paige said as she sat. "I wasn't sure you'd ask," Marlene replied. The waitress brought water. Neither touched it. Paige's voice caught. "I didn't agree with what Mom and Uncle Ben did. I just stayed quiet." Marlene studied her. "Silence doesn't break what's toxic," she said gently. "It cements it." Paige looked down, her fingers folding into the hem of her sleeve. "I know," she said after a long beat. "That's why I'm here." What followed wasn't an apology. It was better. Curiosity. Paige asked questions about Walter, about the trust, about why Marlene had chosen this path. When Marlene mentioned the campus branch she'd been planning for the Langston Trust, Paige leaned in. "I'm part of the Women in Public Finance group," she said. "We've been trying to get funding for a mentorship program. I could help." Marlene smiled, for the first time that day. "Then help." 3 weeks later, the Langston Trust, Campus Edition, launched at Paige's University. The event was small but potent. 30 students, 2 professors, and 1 very proud grandmother watching from the back. Marlene hadn't told Kate, but she had added Paige's name to the contingent list in her will. Not a gift, a recognition. That evening, she returned home to a full inbox, one message blinking red as urgent. It was a voicemail. From Kate. The voice was tight, barely restrained. "You've officially divided this family," Kate said. "Whatever point you were trying to make, you made it, loud and clear. Congrats on turning your granddaughter against her own mother. I hope it was worth it." Marlene listened once, then again, then a third time. Each repeat lost a layer of sting. Each word made it clearer. Kate was not mourning the loss of family. She was mourning the loss of leverage. Marlene didn't reply. Instead, she opened her journal, dated the page, and wrote one clean line. "When you stop being useful to their illusion, they call it betrayal." She turned off her phone, lit a candle, and leaned into the quiet. The next morning was overcast, the kind of gray that makes silence feel heavier. She dressed in a navy coat, the same one she wore at Walter's funeral. The pockets still held a single tissue and the lint of old gum wrappers. Marlene drove to the cemetery, hands steady on the wheel. She parked at the far end, away from the family plots where the Langston name appeared in etched stone. Walter's headstone was simple, his name, 2 dates, and a line that read, "Beloved by all." It still made her snort quietly. Even in death, Walter had been curated. She knelt slowly, the ground damp beneath her slacks, and placed a sealed envelope beneath the base of the flowers, carefully angled so it wouldn't show unless someone moved them. Inside the envelope was a clean notarized copy of the trust reallocation. Her name, Sam's, Page's, the Langston Foundation. No mention of Ben or Kate. "This is what you left behind by not updating it," she whispered to the headstone. "I just finished the sentence." Back in her car, Carmen's email waited in her inbox. Subject, Final Protection Clause. Filed body. All Langston Trust directives are now irrevocable and court-sealed. There are no remaining points of contest. You're covered. Permanently. Marlene read it twice, then opened her podcast calendar. The interview was already booked. The title, When Legacy is Earned. They recorded it in a small studio with exposed brick and soft lighting. Marlene wore a silk scarf knotted at her throat, the same shade of burgundy as her lipstick. Across from her sat a millennial host named Dana, who leaned forward as if everything Marlene said might unlock a door in her own life. "I have to ask," Dana said mid-interview, "why not just stay quiet? Why go public at all?" Marlene didn't hesitate. "Because silence is what made them comfortable erasing me. I'm not loud now, I'm clear." The producer's hand froze over the soundboard. Dana nodded slowly. "That's going in the intro." Later that evening, Carmen sent her a screenshot from Twitter. Ben had posted a thread. "My father's ex-wife weaponized grief to exclude his real family. My sister and I were erased. But you don't get to rewrite someone else's legacy just because they forgot to sign something." Below it, hundreds of comments. Divided, heated. One read, "Sounds like you forgot to call your lawyer, not your dad." Another said, "Real family doesn't show up at funerals with open hands." Marlene didn't respond, but Carmen did. She bookmarked the thread, just in case. The next morning, Marlene opened her email to a subject line that caught her breath. "Can I speak at the next event? Sam." She opened it slowly, hands still slightly damp from rinsing her coffee cup. "I've been thinking. I know I'm not the one who was wronged, but I watched it. I let it happen. If you're open to it, I'd like to say something, not just as your grandson, but as someone who's learning what legacy actually means." She leaned back in her chair, phone pressed against her chest. The scent of the early morning hibiscus drifted in through the open window. Her tea had gone cold again, but something in her had warmed. She typed one word in reply: "Yes." The next evening at the next trust event, the room was hushed, not by command, but by gravity. Sam stood behind the podium at the Langston Trust's quarterly grant event, his tie slightly askew, palms pressed flat on the wood surface like he needed to feel the ground of his own conviction. Marlene sat in the front row, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't asked for this. She'd only given him the platform. What he chose to build on it was his alone. Sam cleared his throat, scanning the crowd of scholarship recipients, advocates, and curious onlookers. She didn't cut them out. They took the knife and used it first. A quiet exhale moved through the room like wind through a wheat field. They didn't lose access. They lost decency. She didn't erase them. She wrote herself back in. Marlene blinked. Just once. That was all the emotion she allowed to cross her face in public. But inside something cracked, then reset stronger. The video went viral within 48 hours. Not just reposted, but dissected, quoted, translated. It appeared on personal finance blogs, elder rights forums, even a few parenting sites under the header, "Boundaries aren't bitterness." Marlene's inbox overflowed. Messages from young women, some estranged from their families, others caretaking mothers who'd never received thanks. "Can you mentor me? I've never seen..." Someone reclaim this kind of power with silence. You made me rethink what legacy even is. She responded to every message herself, no assistant, no auto-replies. If these women were willing to reach out with sincerity, she could meet them with respect. That Saturday, she hosted a brunch in her sunlit kitchen. She wore her late mother's apron and brewed 3 types of tea: jasmine, hibiscus, and Earl Grey. The guests arrived in pairs and trios, diverse in age and background but identical in one way: none of them had ever been chosen first. Until now. One brought homemade jam. Another brought flowers. None arrived empty-handed and none looked like they expected anything in return. Sam handled the introductions, moving through the room with quiet confidence. This is Jamila. She's studying law and built a free tax prep app. This is Tessa, first in her family to go to college. Marlene watched them fill her kitchen with laughter, stories, and questions. The house no longer echoed. It resonated. After everyone left, Sam lingered behind, helping her rinse plates. "You've built something real, Grandma." She dried a teacup carefully. "Real things don't need to be loud." He leaned against the sink. "They need to last, though. I was thinking maybe we could design the next grant cycle together? Expand to include caregivers?" Marlene didn't answer immediately. She opened her notebook instead and scribbled a title across the top of the page. "Next cycle, Those Who Carried Too Much." She nodded. "Yes, let's do that." Later that night, she sat at her writing desk with the windows open. The sounds of distant laughter drifted in from a nearby backyard barbecue. She could smell grilled peaches and charcoal, mingling like a memory. She opened her journal to a fresh page. No preamble, no date. Just one line, written slowly: grief for who they could have been. It was the ache that never found language until now. Not for Walter, but for Ben and Kate. Not because they turned cold, but because they could have chosen warmth. They had every chance to evolve. They just didn't. The doorbell rang the next morning as the sun was just slicing through the curtains. Marlene padded down the hallway, robe cinched tight, slippers soundless on the hardwood. No one stood at the door. Just a plain white envelope, slightly bent from where it had wedged between the handle and the frame. No stamp, no return address. Only her name, written in a familiar, rushed script. Marlene. She stood there for a moment, holding the envelope like it might combust. Then she stepped back inside, closed the door, and placed it on the table. She didn't open it yet. Some letters deserved silence first. It sat for 2 days in the same spot, her entry table, weightless and heavy at once, untouched except for the way her eyes grazed it every time she passed. No return address, no stamp, no salutation. Just her name, scrawled hastily, sharply. When she finally slit the envelope with her letter opener, steel, monogrammed, a wedding gift from Walter's parents, it didn't tremble in her hand. She had steadied herself long before now. The paper inside was a single sheet, folded twice. No card, no fancy handwriting, no apologies in cursive. Just this: "You were always enough. I just didn't like it." Marlene sat down without realizing it, the chair creaking beneath her like a sigh she hadn't meant to release. The rest of the letter was bitter. Kate had never been one to mask her resentment. There were lines about betrayal, about public embarrassment, about inheritance and intention and the family you fractured. But those weren't the words that landed. They weren't the ones that unlocked something old, something raw. That one sentence, blunt, unvarnished truth, was the only thing Marlene had never expected to read. She didn't weep in a cinematic rush. The tears came quietly, the kind that moved down the cheeks like old friends returning unannounced. Not loud, not indulgent, just real. She wasn't crying for the loss. She had already buried that. She was crying for the recognition. Finally, someone had stopped rewriting the narrative long enough to admit it had never been about her being insufficient. It had been about her being undeniable. When the tears dried, she didn't reach for a pen. She didn't write back. She didn't text. She didn't call. She filed the letter in her cabinet under a folder marked in clean, all caps: Sharpie, closure, accepted but not reversed. She closed the drawer with intention, her hand pausing only to adjust the edge of the envelope so it sat perfectly aligned with the tab. That would be its final resting place. Later that afternoon, Carmen called. "The Langston Trust has doubled in attention since the last event. You're now a national case study." Marlene stirred her coffee slowly, watching the swirl of cream cloud the dark surface like a slow bloom. "They're asking to cite you in estate planning seminars, and there's interest from a few financial advocacy groups. We'll need to prepare a media packet." Marlene smiled, faint, deliberate. "We'll give them something better than a packet," she said. "We'll give them a precedent." After she hung up, she walked to her desk and opened the leather-bound journal where she had been collecting lines, titles, and fragments of her story, the kind of lines people usually saved for eulogies. Except she wasn't dead. She wasn't even done. She flipped to the back, where a sticky note marked her working manuscript. The title read, "First Wife, Final Word." She added a fresh line under her last note. "Revenge isn't screaming, it's redirecting." She underlined it twice. The sun dipped low through the western window, casting golden light across her living room wall. It glinted off the silver frame of her Langston Trust press article, off the glass vase Paige had sent filled with wildflowers, and off the piano Walter had once refused to let her replace because sentiment is cheaper than repair. She rose and closed the curtains, sealing in the quiet. This was the home of someone who had survived being overwritten without having to erase anyone in return. The next morning, her email pinged just after she finished breakfast. Subject line, "Book proposal, first wife, final word." She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the clean formatting of a traditional publishing house. An editor had read the recent profiles, heard the podcast clips, and read Sam's speech transcript. They wanted a memoir. They wanted her voice. And they didn't want it softened. "You don't owe anyone redemption. Just the truth." Marlene closed her laptop gently and smiled. It was time to stop being the footnote. She looked past the screen to the curtained window, where sunlight bled into soft afternoon shadows across the hardwood floor. They had wanted her to fade after Walter, after the funeral, after the accounts in the courtroom. They thought inheritance was the story. But this was the rewrite. She opened the draft file. First wife, final word. The cursor blinked at the end of Chapter 12, still waiting for her final edits. Each chapter read like a reclamation. Not angry, just honest. There was the moment Kate had called her excess baggage under her breath at Ben's wedding, and Marlene, in silent grace, had written a check that covered the rehearsal dinner anyway. That chapter was titled, "The Cost of Politeness." There was the scene where Trina had asked if she could, maybe kindly, not come to the family beach trip. That one was called "Requested Absences." And of course the fall from the family group chat. She called that "Ghosted by Blood." She'd written every page with clean, deliberate prose. No dramatics, no character assassinations, just the clarity of a woman who'd stopped waiting to be remembered. Carmen came by the next day to walk through the legal review of the publishing deal. "You're covered," she said, tapping her pen against the folder. "They can't block the memoir. Everything is public record now, including the trust." Marlene offered her a glass of sparkling elderflower water. "Good," she said, "because I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm just done editing myself to spare people who erased me." Carmen smiled. "You're not just publishing a book, you're setting a precedent." Sam delivered the foreword 2 days later. He dropped it off in person, handwritten on thick linen paper. She built something no one thought she'd finish, because they never noticed when she started. This isn't a story of revenge. It's the architecture of grace under erasure. Marlene read it once. Then again. She didn't correct a word. When she texted him, she only wrote, "Thank you for seeing me before the world did." One envelope came in the mail addressed in silver ink. Trina's handwriting, neat, confident. Inside was a single card, still grateful, still learning, warmly, T. Marlene didn't need more. No theatrics, no reparations, just acknowledgement that didn't arrive with conditions. She placed the card in her journal under a tab labeled "Unexpected Grace." The estate remained intact, legally impenetrable, But Marlene, ever precise, had now added new fluidity, a dynamic clause that allowed annual review of active and contingent recipients. Paige remained, Sam too, and 5 young women from Langston Trust's new mentorship wing, future attorneys, writers, and advocates who had once been told they were too much or not enough for something. Marlene titled her final chapter, Who Actually Builds a Legacy? The answer wasn't stamped in bloodline or bound by law, it was built by who showed up and stayed. On the morning of her book's release, Marlene brewed a full pot of coffee instead of her usual cup. The house smelled like roasted hazelnut and inked paper. She wore a soft cream sweater and opened her front door to find 3 copies already stacked neatly at her doorstep, publisher copies. She sat down at her kitchen table, sliced a croissant, and cracked open the hardcover. The title page was simple, First Wife, Final Word, by Marlene Langston. Below it, in Sam's handwriting, you didn't get louder, you got clearer. The afternoon brought a call from Carmen, voice breathless with surprise. You need to see this. She sent a screenshot. Marlene's book had climbed to the top of 2 categories, Elder Financial Advocacy and Memoir, Reclaimed Narratives. Over 2,000 reviews in less than 12 hours. All 5 stars. 2 days later, Marlene holds a quiet launch party in her backyard. The folding chairs were already set when Marlene stepped outside, linen shawl wrapped tight over her blouse despite the soft spring air. Her backyard looked just as she remembered building it, with purpose, not pretense. No string lights or catered displays, just a long wooden table, teapots steaming, copies of First Wife, Final Word stacked like centerpieces. Her guests, former mentees, scholarship recipients, 2 retired librarians and Sam, stood waiting under the gentle sway of a willow tree. Not a single camera. Not a single person who'd once made her feel invisible. She nodded to Sam, who tapped the glass pitcher with a spoon. Thank you all for coming, Marlene began, voice steady. No velvet rope, no champagne tower, just truth, and a second chapter no one else got to write for me. She opened the hardbound copy in her hand. The gold-embossed title caught the light. Here's the line, she said, the one I almost deleted. She cleared her throat, read aloud, After the funeral they forgot me. So I remembered who I was. They clapped, gently, with reverence. Sam's eyes were glassy. The young woman beside him, one of the first Langston Trust grant recipients, wiped her cheek with a napkin printed with the phrase, Legacy isn't left, it's lived. Marlene poured herself a cup of rooibos and walked the perimeter of the garden slowly, letting the moment seep in through her pores like sun through winter glass. She could smell cut rosemary and clover. She could feel the gravel under her flats. She could hear nothing but peace. She had always imagined her ending differently, quieter maybe. But this was orchestral, even in silence. Inside the house, the walls now held framed reviews, reader letters, and a printout of the Trust's new mentorship model titled Marlene's Structure. What had begun as a redirected bank account was now a living architecture. Her memoir had made it into university courses on elder finance and emotional labor. Her name was cited in case studies on trust law reform. Somewhere between losing her family's affection and gaining her own voice, she'd stopped seeking approval and started building tools they would one day need but no longer had access to. Later that evening, after the chairs were folded and the mugs rinsed and stacked, Marlene sat at her desk. She opened the drawer where her journal lived. The cover, soft leather, worn at the edges, gold script read, Owned by me. She flipped to the final page. The line she'd written days before, in the haze of book tours and legal briefings, waited. They toasted their new mother. I kept the account. And the pen. She added one more sentence beneath it. Let them drink to what they thought they won. I'm the one who turned silence into script. There was a soft knock at the door. Sam. He held a small envelope. They asked me to give you this, he said. Marlene took it but didn't open it. I didn't read it, Sam added. Didn't feel right. She nodded. It might be nothing, or it might be the same echo dressed up as regret. He smiled. Well, either way, you already published your version. She looked at him. His earnestness, his quiet loyalty, his refusal to turn away even when it cost him a family group chat or a holiday dinner. "I hope they know," she said quietly. What they could have inherited wasn't the money. It was the map. She placed the envelope under a paperweight without opening it. Her story had already been told. She had no need for epilogues dictated by people who once looked through her. She turned instead to her calendar, next week's speaking engagement at a financial literacy conference, the keynote, "Quiet Women, Loud Estates." She clicked the pen she now kept by her side at all times, scribbled one last note: "Silence only benefits the loud. But structure outlasts everyone." The final light in the house was the glow of her closed laptop. The desktop wallpaper? A scanned copy of the beneficiary designation, still in her name, still untouched. She smiled and whispered, "Primary still means primary." She reached over, closed the journal. No drama, no music swell, just a soft click as leather touched leather. She gently whispered to herself, "They thought I was done. I was just finally holding the checkbook." Small thrill pulsed in her chest, not revenge, but repair. The next day, an email popped up from the East Hills Journal. The subject line read, "Profile Request, Langston Legacy Initiative." A reporter had seen the Langston Trust's nonprofit registration and wanted to feature it in a column about women-led philanthropy. Marlene didn't reply right away. She read the request again, then once more, slower. This wasn't about Walter. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the redirection of it. That evening, she walked barefoot across her back patio, the air damp with coming rain. She poured a glass of white wine and leaned on the railing, her mind miles away from funeral programs and probate paperwork. Her phone buzzed on the table. She checked the screen. Not a message. A post. Kate. "Some people mourn in private. Some weaponize a will." Marlene stared at the glowing words under a filtered photo of the cemetery gates. The comments were sympathetic, vague hearts and sad faces. One reply simply read, "So sorry, babe." She didn't screenshot it. She didn't reply. Instead, she tapped her estate planning app and reviewed the contingent clause she'd added just yesterday. There was still room for edits, but nothing urgent. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, a clean headline stamped across the front of the East Hills Journal lifestyle section. "Widow-turned-silent strategist, how Marlene Langston rebuilt a legacy from quiet power." The photo accompanying it was understated. Marlene on her garden bench wearing a navy blouse and pearl studs, a teacup in hand. The caption read, "We don't stop loving when we're erased," she says. "We just redirect it." Marlene read the headline twice, not for ego, for accuracy. She scanned the first paragraph. Her years as a music educator, her marriage to Walter, and the founding of the Langston Literacy Trust. The piece made no mention of Trina, Kate, or Ben, no sordid disputes, just the facts, just the direction her grief had taken. She folded the paper in half and placed it beside her toast. Then she opened her inbox. The emails poured in. Subject lines like, "Thank you for being visible. Your article made me revise my will. I didn't know we were allowed to do this." Women of every decade, writing from library computers and city condos telling her, "You reminded me I'm not a footnote." One woman, a retired nurse in Arizona, wrote, "My daughter called me obsolete last Thanksgiving. I've been paying her phone bill ever since. You just gave me permission to log out." Marlene sat back and let the weight of it settle. She didn't reply. Not yet. She just read. In the comment section beneath the digital version of the piece, a verified estate attorney from New York had left a single line. "This is how you protect what you built." Marlene copied the comment and pasted it into her estate folder under a tab called Third-Party Validation. That afternoon, a new email slid in. Short subject line, no punctuation. Sam, her grandson. Kate's son. "Grandma, I had no idea about any of it. Can we talk? Sam." She stared at the message for a long while, the cursor blinking below his name like a pulse. Her reply was just 2 lines. "Lunch? Friday. Your pick. Love, M." They met at a cafe across town. Small tables, warm bread, no crowd. Sam hugged her gently, like he wasn't sure if he had the right. She hugged back, without hesitation. He looked older than she remembered. Not in years, but in eyes. The kind of aging disappointment gives you. They ordered coffee, then silence. It was Sam who broke it. I read everything. I didn't know how far it had all gone. Marlene stirred her drink. None of it happened overnight. You don't seem bitter, he said, almost like a question. She smiled faintly. Bitterness is noisy. This is architecture. He blinked, like that line knocked something loose in his mind. I'm proud of you, he added. I hope that's not weird. It's overdue, she said, but never unwelcome. He pulled out his phone. Do you mind if I post this lunch? Just, not about the article. Just us. She nodded. As long as you don't crop out my good side. They both laughed, something that felt rare, but real. By evening, her garden lights flickered on, casting long shadows over the stone path. She was pruning when she saw the car pull into her driveway. A black SUV, clean, parked at an angle like someone uncertain about staying. The door opened slowly. Trina stepped out. Alone. No makeup, no performance. Just her. Marlene straightened from the rose bushes, brushing soil from her gloves with slow, deliberate motions. Come for tea, she said finally, not unkindly, or stay out there and burn. Your call. Trina stepped forward. No stilettos today, just flats, jeans, and a sleeveless blouse that clung to the humid air. She looked smaller. Inside, Marlene led her to the sunroom, quiet, floral, and bright. 2 cups, already set from habit, wait